There it is. He's the prophet and he's the pioneer. That's what I was talking about. There they go. They finally got it right with the best of 5 down here. So they have great announcers in StarCraft. They always have. The whole shoutcasting thing was invented for StarCraft, which is the first major eSports game that I'm familiar with. You know, again, going all the way back to the 90s. But these are, you know, I mean, hero is, I'm not going to keep saying maybe the best. Hero is definitely one of the best Protoss players, not the best. Elazer is not the best Zerg player in the world, but he is up there and continues to get better. And in this current ESL Masters today, going on 2023, is playing very well. This is from last year. This is a best of 5. I believe hero wins this 3-1. I guess it could be a sweep. So I have to get the so the announcers actually start this game somewhat speechless, and so I actually don't want to turn them down too much. And the reason they're so speechless is because, as I mentioned, as great as hero is as a Protoss player, he's specifically extra great against Zerg. And it just strikes fear into them with his very presence, especially when he has 5 or 7 games to do it. He's also great Protoss v Protoss, as we'll see in the next game, where he whoops Estrella, excuse me, who plays Protoss very quickly. He has most trouble with the Terrans, and usually when he loses big games, it's to the Terrans. And so his defeat against Morrow in the semifinals, and then against Bunny in the finals, which we're going to watch, who are Terran players, especially impressive. So this is just the early stages where they're building the base. So I already covered the classic Scarlet versus Bomber 3-game matchup from 10 years ago. I covered, as mentioned, Raynor versus Hero from 2019, where Raynor, as a brand new player basically at that point, won seemingly out of nowhere. But if you watch closely, as I was saying, Hero is clearly playing a little sloppy and not up to his top form. So now on screen, it's 2022, so 3 years after that loss to Raynor that I covered extensively on my stream. And spoiler alert, Hero is going to win this and the next 3 rounds with various levels of dominance to go on and win in front of a big crowd in Atlanta, which is great, you know. As an American, you know, but my favorite player being a Korean, Hero, to get to come to the States and win a ginormous tournament against the best players in the world, both European and, of course, the Koreans, in Atlanta in front of, I'm sure, a lot of Americans as well as travelers from other countries is very cool and just makes me very happy.
Hero is not deterred at all. He is still going in for another.
So I'm gonna try and keep on the announcer sound for you guys, even while I'm talking. I'm also gonna try. Sorry, I just touched the mic. I'm also gonna try not to shout too much because I'm using my actual mic and not just my camera mic. So it's a wonderful mic. Thank you, Blue Snowball. But it's very sensitive, and so I have to make sure not to get it too close and start shouting. So here are the Oracles, who were introduced after in Phase 2 of 3 of StarCraft 2. Heart of the Swarm Zerg campaign were introduced, but were given further powers and made even more powerful in Phase 3 of 3, Legacy of the Void, back in 2015. And one thing you notice watching Hero against... Hold on one sec.
So Hero can just be even more aggressive.
Turn them up a little bit, I think. You notice is that his unit compositions are very different, not as developed as they are now or here as we see in 2022, back in 2019. but he was not using 2, 3, 4 early oracles. And as that series against Raynor went along, even though Raynor ended up winning, he does start trying to use the oracles more. And so, I think in the intervening time of 2019, where he lost to Raynor in the WCS, to here in 2022, where he won in Atlanta last year, he did a lot of oracle play in practice, and it's become, an opening for a lot of players to use oracles to harass and just destroy the early supply line in production of opponents. But when hero puts his mind to doing a certain unit or unit composition or build or whatever, he is the best in it when his head is on straight and he's focused and not getting a little sloppy or overconfident. It will automatically then become the best at whatever that strategy is. And he is extremely focused throughout these Atlanta 2022 games, which is part of why I want to cover it, especially after being very, very critical in my my retrospective cast of him versus Raynor and losing, not because he's the worst player, but because he was the less focused and less committed player in 2019. Here in 2022 Atlanta, very dominant, very focused. So, all right, so let's jump into the game. So we're half hour into the podcast and over 6 minutes into the game. So we just saw a bunch of oracle play from
He gets a little bit more scouting information. He gets eyes on the fourth base. He's still making nothing but links. Link Bane isn't bad, but if this
adjusting the sound a little bit, we saw
devastating here for Elazer. He needs more roaches than anything.
and here he's got 3 oracles. I mean, 2's already considered a good amount. 3 is considered bold, and more than that is considered, crazy. But hero is on purpose acts a little crazy and unpredictable and irrational, probably even to himself, as has been pointed out by the announcers, that he doesn't even know until the moment he does certain moves that he's going to do those moves. So 7.5 minutes into this game, they're about even on supply, both workers and army, and upgrades and economy. So everything's very equal here, 0-0 against the Elazer. Again, this is round of 16, Atlanta 2022, best of 5, hero versus Elazer. And then we're going to go quarterfinals, semifinals, finals with hero. In your upper left, they mostly show what's in production. One thing you will notice about hero when it comes to production is that while he is excellent he's constantly spending his money, which is easy to do with Protoss. It's too easy because it's so expensive. He's constantly spending the money at the right rate. He's never building more than 1 or 2 of anything, but he's always building 1 or 2 of everything, if that makes sense. He's a little slow on upgrades sometimes, outside of the blink, which is almost mandatory because of how much people use stalkers. And one thing we'll talk about with hero is, while he can do the whole I'm going to build 1 million stalkers and kill you that way, especially against other Protoss, because Protoss versus Protoss games almost always end up becoming just tons of stalkers versus tons of stalkers. But in all matchups, you see tons of stalkers who can blink all over the place. He mastered that style and can do it, and can beat you with it if that's all you're going to do. But again, in the upper left here, you can see he's building photon cannons and shield batteries. He's constantly building shield batteries for his base because he doesn't like... Here he is building photon cannons, which he doesn't always do a ton of, but he is always building 1 or 2 shield batteries really throughout the entirety of these games, because his version of defense is the way I play defense in StarCraft, both in general and specifically as Protoss, which is to just beam back all my units to the base and use that to clear out the attack. Well, with the addition of the shield battery, here's more probes coming in one of his upgrades. With the introduction of the shield battery, with the 3rd and final major phase, Legacy of the Void for StarCraft 2 in 2015, introduction of the shield battery. As you can see here, he's So in the bottom left is the mini map. All of this red is our hero bases, which is quite a bit. Elazer has expanded the creep a lot, but he doesn't have a lot of big bases. Hero already has 4 or 5 very significant sized bases. And for 10 minutes in the game, already, while there is a push going on here, in the west side of the map towards the northwest bases of Hero, there comes the disruptors to blow up in their face. He's so good at using them, taking down the laser units. But
I fear that Hero just has too much damage.
Yeah, Hero's already taking too much damage. If you look at the bottom here, his worker count is now minus 20. His army count is now minus 20. He's sitting on a lot of money, so he's not spending quick enough. But with Protoss, it takes a long time to beam in or produce units. You can spend that money quickly, but they still have to get on the board and then get into play, and the Protoss are the slowest. Here you see a little ball of red in the mini-map, which is, I guess, just his oracles, trying to distract. So we're at 11 minutes into the game, and I'll definitely, there's the casters, the late VP and Yakuzaku. If you watch the time codes, you know, when you become at expert level in StarCraft 2, you have a bunch of different strategies and builds that you can do. But once you decide on a certain build of structures and units, they start coming out within seconds or even milliseconds of when you plan on it if things are going right. And having watched a ton of Hero, and we're going to watch obviously a ton more here and be talking about it, just getting going in the round of 16 from last year in Atlanta, when Hero ultimately won the whole thing. At about 9.5 minutes is actually where Hero has produced enough gateways to beam in enough units at once to mount an attack. And then he's so aggressive, no matter about and he comes out. So just a couple of seconds ago. Right, they just said it was decisive, but just a couple minutes ago, these supposedly super smart announcers, oh, sorry about that. I want to turn them down a little bit. Just a couple minutes ago, they were saying, and I was also agreeing, that Hero had, he was losing too many units, his production was going down, his base was getting attacked, and Elazer chose exactly the right moment to attack at around 9-10 minutes, because again, that's usually when Hero mounts his first big Protoss army push to the opponent. What I was going to say was, Hero always is building more and more gateways for units. And so while he never builds, as I mentioned, he so rarely builds, and we'll see in the production stats going forward up here during the games, while he's always building new buildings and units, as you need to in StarCraft, he usually never gets in a situation where he has to build more than 2 or maybe 3 gateways, or warp gates, which is where the main units beam in through for the Protoss. He's really building more than 2 or 3 at a time, but by 9.5 minutes, he's got between 7 and 10 gateways, which means you can instantaneously beam in that number of units, as long as you have a pylon or their transport ship, the warp prism, which can turn into like a floating portable pylon to beam in units, and that's what he does. So he builds up an initial force, and then he queues up, he keeps building new structures that can produce units, and then at around 9-10 minutes, he beams in as many as he can, having saved up his money, and at around 9.5 minutes, he makes his first push with between 15 and 20 units, maybe sometimes more, sometimes less, excuse me. Here's the intros to them. Really weird music. I don't know, sort of ironically old school sounding music, but I don't know why they're doing that with the weird trumpets. But anyways, he's so aggressive as a Protoss player that even though their units are the most expensive to produce and take the longest to produce, after that initial rush that he almost always will make as a Protoss player in the 9th or 10th minute, every 2 to 3 minutes after that, for the rest of the game, he mounts another attack, even if you can only get a few units together. But that never happens. He always seems to be able to rebuild his Protoss army in 2 to 3 minutes, and that has to do with macro production, with what they call macro play, macro production. They're not going to show on the map outside. In the beginning, there's nothing going on other than early base production and some scouting. But once the game really gets going, they focus on the units and the battles, which is what people want to see. But in the background, the best players like hero have a constant production line going. Now he's in the red. You can see up here, we're a minute and a half. He's now building his second nexus, which is second base point. If you look down here, he's building his second nexus 2 stops down, not what they call the natural second base, which is the closest and most easily defensible second one here. You can see with my yellow mouse, but 2 down. Not exactly sure why. We'll find out soon. Here you can see one of everything. 1 geyser for gas, 1 crystal to increase the supply and ability to build buildings, the cybernetics core, which opens up a lot of build options, the new base, which are called Nexus, and converting gateways into warp gates so that he can then beam units anywhere on the map where there's a pylon field for them to build. So this is the where you would expect the second base to be, because it's especially on this giant cosmic sapphire map. The second base is so much closer and easier to access for the player than anything else, and so Elazer was scouting it with a couple of Zerglings. I assume at this point he's figured out. Oh, sorry, I have this backwards. Elazer went 2 down. Built. Let me start that over again. I'm gonna restart this feed. Nah, we won't restart the feed. We'll keep going now. But I can go back a little bit. So yeah, so here is the scouting that's being done by hero. I am going to be doing some stop starts and replay, guys. That's part of the reason I like doing these. As fun as doing live stuff is, I've discovered it's fun to be able to stop it too. So normally, so blue this time is Elazer, the Zerg player. Normally here, where hero's scout would be the second base, because it's just down the ramp from the first one. But he decides to go to where the third or fourth base would be, Elazer that is, down here. But in just a second, he is going to start building that second base. I'm not sure why he's building the second base third in terms of order of operations, but that he's trying something new, I suppose. Here you see hero. He's already down at the bottom. He's already built into his. I can't access that properly. He's already built into his. If you look in the lower left, I'll pull my mouse out here and see if the thing goes away. In the bottom left of the screen, you see the mini map. In red is hero, and so hero has already expanded into his what they call natural second base, the obvious second base. And here, Elazer is trying to chase away hero's little Pro-B, so that he can plant his third Zerg base there. But anyways, the point is, as a stats guy, I love StarCraft for so many reasons, but one of them is it has so many stats. I'm a big fan of baseball, more so than other sports for a lot of reasons, but one of them is all the stats. As a math guy and a statistician guy, I love the stats. So down here we have their total available production, their total actual production, what they call supply. The yellow number is how many workers they have. The orange number is not how many fighters they have, but the total power of the fighters. So, for example, normal Marines count as 1, but bigger units can count 2, 3, 4, or even 5 or 6 supply individually. So this is a measurement of the power of the army, not the number of the army. The blue number is how many minerals they have in the bank at the moment, and the green number is how much gas they have in the bank in the moment. And this final one, which they haven't started yet, are upgrades. They don't show how many minerals or gas per minute or seconds or so forth they're making, so you have to sort of estimate that. But if you watch herO's numbers here, he always has a few hundred minerals and a few hundred gas. He's red this time, and you look up here, the production line, again, 1 or 2 of everything at most. He has 1 upgrade coming, 1 adept, 2 probe workers only. I mean, it's very tempting to just spam workers to get your economy going quickly, but then you don't have money for anything else. And then he won't spend for a little bit, so that his money will pop back up down here. Now we have another Nexus coming, which is the command center for the Protoss, right down here. He could have gone to the south for his 3rd base, but he goes towards the center, which I always prefer. For while it's harder to defend, and there's no question about it, because the further in the center you go, the more entrances and exits and exposure are available to your opponent. It starts moving your collective force closer to the enemy's side. And therefore easier to get units out and faster to get them into your enemy's base, into enemy areas, or so forth. And so here he is building a couple more crystals and a Nexus.
Exactly, ZDeps, they do shade on out of there. We do have that roach horn on the way. It's a little bit late, not gonna lie.
So we're 5 minutes in. Everything is pretty even. It looks like Elazer has maybe a 4th base coming, as herO's starting his 3rd base. Very normal, and actually expected for the Zerg, who are the cheap fast build units, while the Protoss are the expensive slow build units. Zerg are almost always going to have 2 or 3 times more bases and coverage, using their purple creep goo, spreading across the map. Zerg are going to, as the game goes on, cover 2 or 3 times more map area via base and creep than the Protoss is with their bases and forces. That's just how it's going to go because of the cost of units and buildings and the speed of construction and so forth. Now, you know, obviously Zerg can build 16 units at once, so, you know, Elazer went from building nothing to building 16, 17 offensive units. Here comes 1 robotics bay. herO always seems to have immortals and then colossi and disruptors and the things that come out of the robotics bay that aren't bio units, as they call them, but a robotic unit. But he's never building more than 1 at a time, and usually doesn't have more than 3 or 4 robotics bays that I'm aware of. But he does make sure to get them early. Here's, as I mentioned, he's always building shield batteries specifically for defenses against what we just saw there with the Zerg. He's in. But meanwhile, he had gotten to the potential 4th base for Elazer Zerg and forced him to cancel the build of that base via harassment. These adepts individually aren't amazing other than as scouts, but now they can take a ton of damage, and, well, they're only ground to ground. They don't have a ton of damage that they throw out. They are great in large number against workers because they can turn into little shade spirits that can move fast unseen and get behind enemy lines, and he used that to take out base for the 4th base attempt for Elazer, the blue Zerg player. Those were the adepts. Here are the adepts there. So as adept, you can shoot out these, you know, psionic shades, as they're called. Here they are, and control them separately from your actual units. And at any moment until the clock runs down on the shades and they disappear, you can actually transfer your physical unit into wherever their shade is, which can be used both offensively and defensively. Here in this game, herO's doing something he doesn't normally do, because we're at 8 minutes, and as I've mentioned a lot, and we'll keep mentioning, it's at 9 minutes or 9.5 minutes when as you can see, the production ramped up big time by hero up here for the first time this game. He's producing 6, 7, 8, 9 different types of things in multiples. So far, he's been conservative in spending, saving his pennies. Usually about a minute from now is his first major attack, and I think we're going to see that, even though Elazer's army is quite bigger at the moment, and his economy is beefier at the moment. They have similar number of workers. 74 is a lot of workers for Protoss. You never want to be the Zerg player with fewer workers than a Protoss player, and that's what's happening here. So that favors hero. And because Protoss, while expensive, can ultimately beam down a whole bunch of units at once, depending on how many gateways or warp gates they have. Hero is waiting for that 9.5 minute mark, so I expect within the next minute. This is the warp prism, which can physically. Sorry guys, I have to do some stop and start. It's moving too fast otherwise. This warp prism unit here can physically carry units as a transport, just like the Medevac for the Terrans, but it also can then make itself stationary into a floating pylon, basically, where you can beam in units. So there's multiple ways that it can transport units in and out of battle. So here it's just scouting the base, but at 9 minutes, as you can see here on the clock, 9 minutes of game time, based on Hero's past performances, I'm expecting him to. I mean, look, right now, Elazer's got an army power of 84, and Hero's, basically half of that. So you're thinking, okay, he's got way less money, way less army, but because he keeps building these warp gates and some robotics bays for the bigger robotics units up in the upper left here in his production line, he keeps building them consistently and never stops. At a certain point within the next minute or so, I expect him to do a huge beam in, which will turn this 48 into at least a 70, but probably closer to an 80 to 100 of power of total units. Keep in mind that even the most basic Protoss unit, their infantry unit that we see here, the Zealot, just the basic, they got the blades coming, the psionic blades coming out of their hands, melee unit. Even their most basic unit costs 2 supply. So as Protoss, you can't actually physically have more than 100 units on the field at once, even though your supply is technically 200. Whereas these little Zerglings are only count against the supply 1. Count 1 against the supply, so you could theoretically have 200 Zerglings on the field with your maxed out 200 supply. So here we go at 9 minutes, where, as usual, Hero's been aggressive, made some gains, then he starts to look overly aggressive, even sloppy, and it seems like the momentum's shifting like in the last game. But let's see if Hero follows his normal form and launches some sort of at least medium-sized attack in the next minute or so for the first time. And then, as I said before, we'll keep mentioning, he then continues to mount assaults every 2 to 4 minutes or so for the rest of the game against the other side, even if he loses all of those engagements badly. If you're a football fan, he's like Eli Manning. He can throw 5 interceptions, but then come back out and still throw 3 touchdowns. It's part of playing a riskier strategy of sport or esport, to be constantly on the attack, because you can lose so quickly when you neglect defenses. But that's how Hero plays. So, all right, so let me shut up and play this out, and we'll see what he does with this Warp Prism, and if and when in the next minute or so he launches that first major attack.
Spotted the goal.
Yeah, the Hail Mary will not come into play here, or shouldn't come into play.
So
for Elazer.
He just filled up.
Hero's #1 priority right now.
Right, so he was able to use. Here we go. So this is just a force of adepts against a ton of ground attack from the Zerg. It was completely destroyed. So now Hero's down to 36. And you'd think Elazer would do a counter attack, having triple the unit power right now. I think that's what's happening. Right, Hero's vulnerable as usual after a failed attack. Now we're at almost 10 minutes. And now normally what would have happened was he wouldn't have. Normally a Hero would not have attacked 20-30 seconds ago, and he would have waited for this big force of Stalkers, Disruptors, and some Immortals here, and then combine that into one big death ball, as they call it, to make his first big attack. But he decided, for whatever reason, I think he was waiting for he's waiting for upgrades to finish. He has 2 important upgrades here, and he needs some more defenses. He needs still some more gateways so we can build more units. So I think he attacked a little bit earlier. Let's see, where was it? Or he was pushed back right here. I think he's just distracting here at 9 minutes and 5 seconds, because look at 9 minutes and 5 seconds, look at herO's build. He so rarely has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different types of things being built at once. 8 total things being built, because there are 2 gateways, so that's increasing the number of units he can warp in. Stalkers and Disruptors for the attack. Blink, so that the gives the teleportation ability to the Stalkers, which is the main unit, and upgrade for ground troops. Offensive upgrade for ground troops, which is so important for pretty much all units across all races. So he's going to give up on this attack, probably planned to, wasn't able to take out, he was trying to take out the new 4th or 5th base from Elazer's Zerg army. Maybe. There's just too many little Zergalinglings here. So he jumps back into his Warp Prism, and they can attack him because they're not anti-air units. Okay, so now at 9 minutes 11 seconds, well, there are some Zealots, which are the most basic infantry forces in that transport we just saw, the Warp Prism. Now he's sending 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-ish or 9 Adepts, which normally him and most Protest players have stopped using at this point in the game, because, you know, little bits of harassment of worker lines and so forth 9 minutes in is usually not your top priority. You're moving to other units. So nope, he's actually sending in a force of just Adepts. They're going to be on the creep and then within sight of the or on site of the Zerg base. So let's see what happens here.
Right now is to take out that gold base, but honestly,
so here he comes, and you know, while these are this ball of blue here is a combination of Zerglings, which are the most basic little tiny guys. They're sort of medium-sized ground units for the Zerg, which are called Roaches. And then these glowy bigger ones are just evolved Roaches or mutated Roaches that trade their traditional just ground attack for shooting up this big ball of explosive bile or poison, which then they try and land on the enemies, and it slows them down and damages them. This is a sizable Zerg force against what's on paper an okay sized Protoss force, but Adepts by themselves as a mini army is not going to do too much. And so Elazer's 82-52 lead in terms of army power is going to shift even more heavily to Elazer in just a second, as these Adepts are going to get nailed. So watch these numbers down here: 88-46, 86-40, 86-36, and in just a few seconds, now Elazer has well over twice as many units. These are Zerg Queens, which do everything, including heal, spread the creep, attack ground units, attack air units. This is an Overseer, which can spy, and it's the transport unit for the Zerg. And my guess was that Elazer was going to do a counterattack. herO's been around for so long as a player. There's so much footage on him, especially because he goes far in almost every tournament. He's played 1 million tournaments over the last 10-15 years. There's tons of footage on him. And so even though he's mostly unpredictable in terms of individual attacks, what is predictable is when, he starts doing his big attacks, and that's now at 9.5 minutes. So I would think with herO down to only 36 units, or I should say a power of 36 for his units, which is very low, and just a much lower overall supply, a much lower overall mineral count and so forth. You'd think that Elazer would do, I would think that Elazer would do a counterattack with his Zerg. But just like a small number of Protoss forces that looks like nothing can be very powerful, because Protoss can be the most powerful when you have the money and time to build them. You can also have a ginormous Zerg army that looks like it could rip apart the whole map in 5 seconds, that can itself get ripped apart in 5 seconds, because they're built to be built fast and to move fast and to attack fast, but they also go down quickly, even the big scary looking one. So let's see what Elazer does. 9 minutes 24 seconds after hero quote unquote lost, I think on purpose, what I believe was a distraction attack with those adepts a few seconds ago.
So that's one fewer thing for Elazer to worry about.
All right, so here they go. Again, keep your eye on the mini map down here to see the movement of units. All right, there's the warp prism. Right, and so they mentioned that he's very vulnerable. Of course, in the last game, the first big Zerg attack of Elazer against hero, both the announcers and myself was like, oh, this is it for hero. He's done. And hero came back with a huge offensive just a couple minutes later, ended up winning that game decisively. So here is the first time when he's going to be punished for not keeping units at home or not buying a bunch of, cannons and other defenses and so forth, other than some shield batteries to recharge the shields, which, mostly Protoss are the only ones that use shields. But his forces are spread out. He doesn't have that many. He just lost a bunch of units on the other side. So Elazer is indeed going to try and counterattack on what I believe this is the fourth base. It's either the third or fourth base of hero. And they're already retreating. And the reason they're retreating is, well, these disruptors, which were added in the final version of StarCraft 2, Legacy of the Void 2015, 2016, they're very hard to control, and they don't do a whole lot. But the one thing they do is they shoot out a giant time bomb. And while it takes forever to go off, and it's extremely hard to control because you have to control the unit, then you have to manually key to shoot its time bomb, which is called a purification nova. And then it stops for 2 seconds before it goes off, and the other player can move their units. Nevertheless, it's particularly effective against small to medium-sized ground infantry units like these Zerglings and Roaches here. And so really he's got 3 disruptors, and he's only got a few stalkers and 1 immortal, which is his one heavy robotics unit. 1 or 2 of these disruptors, if these units stay clumped together, they could all die if that purification nova time bomb goes off when hero plans it, and they're unable to separate the units or get them out of there. So Elazer, rather than risking losing what army he has, retreated before he really started attacking the Protoss base, because hero was just in time able to get those disruptors in, which are one of those units that it's like nuclear weapons. Mutually assured destruction. You might lose your disruptors and some of your own units blowing them up, but you also can take out an insane number of bad guys with them. And so even though they often won't, they'll often just float around and not even shoot off their purification novas, or the novas will miss as a effective countermeasure, or just a constant defensive presence that they could go off and kill a bunch of your cheap giant army, Zerg army. Just the presence of them and the threat of them is more than enough to scare away a relatively small. It looks big because the mutated roaches look like they can do more damage than they can actually do. This is not a very big Zerg army. 3 disruptors, certainly enough to scare you off. So now he's blinking. Up, comes back. Okay, so the Roaches briefly came back as if to do a second attempt of an attack. Part of it was because Elazer now has a big thing of Zerglings coming in to double the size of his army, but they're even more susceptible to these purification novas. And as you can see here, this disruptor got a purification nova off. This is the timer up here for how long it has before it goes off or just self-destructs harmlessly. Let's see if he gets any connection with it. And he kills his own unit. But it doesn't matter that he killed his own unit, because just shooting that one disruptor bomb, disruptor It's called the Purification Nova. Nova's a character. It's hard to get all these names right. The unit's called the Disruptor. What it shoots out is called a Purification Nova. I'm just going to call it a Disruptor or a Nova. So that Nova, it sent out, while it didn't kill any bad guys and actually killed one of his own units, it was purely for defensive reasons to get them to back the hell off of his Protoss bases. And indeed, that happened. And so now that that's happened, and you can still see a beefy construction queue for both sides now at almost 10 minutes, having done some small harassment attacks of his own, and then surviving the first maybe attack by his opponent, Elazer, with the Zerg. Now at 10 minutes, I would expect that there would be an attack mounted by hero, almost guaranteed. I just don't know because you can't see all the stats that you want at the same time. You sort of have to keep track of it. I don't know how many gateways he has total between these 4 bases. My guess is somewhere between 8 and 10, but you take his current army, which has a power of 52, so that's probably like 15, 20 units at most. But then you also have to count all the units that he can almost instantaneously beam in based on the number of gateways that he has. So this can go from 52 to 100. This can double to 100 very quickly and put him in a great position. So these numbers can be very deceiving in terms of who has how many units and so forth. And also the money can be deceiving because it seems great to have a lot of money, but it also means you're not spending it when you should be buying new structures and units. Hero has a lot of gas at the moment, but generally he keeps less than 1,000 of minerals and less than 1,000 of gas in his bank always, because he's constantly producing, even if it's not a huge amount of stuff. But producing charge, which makes his zealots, which is his basic infantry unit, charge the enemy, and so with surprise attacks can do a lot of damage, and upgrading those melee weapons, plus some defenses, an added supply, and yet another gateway so he can beam in more units. And that it's almost at 10 minutes. This is later than he would want to attack. I very much expect hero to attack. Let's see what happens. Sorry I'm stopping a lot and repeating myself a lot, guys. I'm still getting warmed up for this cast today. Probably listening to myself. I think I might be going a little loud. I'm going to turn myself down a little bit. Okay, so now they're back in his base. They went to the northernmost Protoss base, and are trying again, but again he's got disruptors and he's about to beam in units. These are units beaming in, and I knew that he was beaming in a bunch of zealots, because it's the only Protoss, it's the only Protoss unit, mostly at least Protoss basic unit, that you can buy with just minerals, not gas. Gas is harder to get, and is, the more advanced the unit, the more gas it costs, as well as minerals. And so when I saw that he had a lot of gas in the bank and not so many minerals, I'm thinking, okay, he's building zealots because they just cost minerals and not gas, and he just dropped a bunch into his base, even though their 2 big upgrades have not completed yet. All right, we'll start again. All right, so here we go. There's another attack here. So this is yet another. So this was a base that Elazer did the psych out attack 45 seconds ago, and retreated from. These are all what are called banelings, and each one of these have only one purpose, which is to explode themselves. They're suicide bombers, and you can take out a ton of units and buildings with them if they're not stopped properly. And they're fast and they're extremely damaging. They can only be used once, and then you have to rebuild them, but they do a ton of damage, and there's, as you can see, no defense here whatsoever for hero. So let's see what goes on with these banelings in hero's 3rd base, but what's now his primary base in terms of being the most central and the most forward. This would be called the forward base in military terminology. All right, then he split the he had an even bigger force of those banelings than we thought, and so he's going to now try and do this giant multiple suicide bomb explosion thing in multiple bases. Let's see. The disruptors, that's what they do. They kill small units. So he got off at least one disruptor nova and cut what was over a dozen banelings down to 4 or 5.
Move command.
Oh, right. Oh, right. Elazer could have avoided it, but StarCraft has all these weird things where you can move. You can do what's called attack a move, where you move, but you're telling the unit to attack. If it runs into any bad guys along the way, you can hold position. You can have them patrol an area. Or you can do the thing that only the pro units can do, which is take one big force and just manually, using your mouse at hyper fast speeds for a human brain, split the units into numerous groups. And Elazer, the announcers can tell, even though they're not watching him physically type on the keyboard or use the mouse, just by watching the match and knowing Elazer's play style and how the Zerg play in general, that he just hit the wrong key at the wrong time, and you'll hear them sort of freaking out in the background. We'll see if he can still get some damage with these Baneling suicide bombers.
Feels bad, man, if you are Elazer right now. He caught those disruptors, but weren't quite able to kill them.
Right, because disruptors are floating, they're actually considered ground units, and they can only attack ground units. Another limitation on them, and so they can be taken out by a medium-sized group of those explosive banelings.
Because those banelings were.
So he's still managing to mount a big attack. It's now 10.5 minutes. hero has not created that big army that I was expecting because Elazer keeps putting the pressure on hero. And honestly, I think, again, hero's been around for so long and won so many tournaments, everyone knows how good he is and how sneaky he can be. But if for some reason you were playing hero for the first time in a game or a tournament, the first piece of advice is he is going to be aggressive the whole game, and so you also have to be aggressive, because the only way to control hero's aggression, because he can build and move those Protoss units so fast and so well, considering how slow and expensive they are, is the only way to counteract that is to be offensively minded yourself, so that he's forced to defend the base, which he doesn't want to be doing. He wants to be on the attack, and so Elazer at least is keeping the action in the area of hero's bases and away from his own bases, even though he messed up that Baneling attack. This here, you can see with my yellow mouse, this here is about a bunch of units that will get beamed in but are already getting attacked by bad guys. You are heavily vulnerable to attack while beaming in before you even materialize. And so this is a very gutsy, risky beam in, which is part of why, while this is a relatively small Zerg force, Elazer is thinking maybe to go after the base. I want to point out that this base is the fourth and most removed and thus vulnerable of hero's bases. He's not even attempted to mine either of these gas geysers, and he has currently 0 workers working on the minerals. So normally you'd have 3 work probes, which are the Protoss workers. You'd have 3 per gas geyser, and then whatever this number is up here for minerals. So that's 16 plus 3 plus 3. So he should have 22 workers working to gain gas and minerals here. He has nothing at the moment other than 1 gateway, a forge, which is for upgrades, which is cool, and the crystal, which is just powering things, 2 crystals called pylons, powering things, 1 cannon. I don't even think he's got, no, there's a 2nd cannon here, and he might have had a shield, a battery, and so he's trying to desperately beam in units. But as we'll see in future games, when he plays better, by 10.5 minutes, whatever happened in his first attack at 9 or 10 minutes, that almost always happens with hero, by 10.5, 11 minutes, he's already well on the way to building or even moving his 2nd army already, having recovered regardless. But here, there's just too much pressure.
Command for a little bit too long. There is a lot of momentum going.
Okay, and so because just like it takes these disruptors, just like it takes their giant explosive novas a few seconds to go off, the orangey things that these morphed roaches shoot in the air and then drop on you, as which is dropped right here, also takes a couple seconds to, kind of wind up, go up in the air, and then come down. It's not an instantaneous thing. He saw those units beaming in, and he timed it pretty well so that those units would get hit by the giant bile explosion, either as they were warping in or right after they warped in. It appears they moved.
I'm not entirely convinced he can do it. I mean, the shield battery.
So the charge is about to happen for the Zealots, for hero. As you can see, Elazer's been losing units too, and while hero's only at 55 power for his army, which is very low for Protoss 11 minutes in the game, he's still staying close, and while there's no probes working, there were no probes working at this base, now he assigns a ton of probes to work at this base, that he must have had at another base and moved, because 75 probes for a Protoss is a lot. Elazer just seems very unsure with each of these little attacks, whether he actually wants to attack or not, and whether he wants to take a second or third stab at it.
Every single one of these disruptors. Elazer trading quite well here, but as you were saying,
alright, so he does take out a gateway, so that's one less unit that can get beamed in by hero. But as they focused on what I just showed you, which is that he mostly survived that attack, other than he lost a pylon and maybe a gateway, but he still managed to sneak in all these probes and immediately go from 0 mining to maximum mining at this 4th base. And another thing I'm going to talk about is a major strength and weakness of hero is that outside of his first 2 or 3 bases, he expands to 4, 5, 6 bases purely for minerals and gas, because Protoss are just so hungry for raw materials, way more than the other races. But because he doesn't actually build full bases, but just enough to mine those bases, he's even, he's allergic to defending his bases. He's even more allergic to defending his resource bases, which are only there to mine and don't have advanced structures. But for better or worse, he survived that and got his probes there and is starting to mine. And you're going to start seeing this blue number for hero start going up pretty quickly as they start bringing in a handful of minerals apiece, which adds up pretty quickly. But even after he lost a couple things there, he doesn't panic, and hero continues pretty normal production cycle, and here is his first full force. So at 11 minutes 7 seconds, which is 2 minutes later than he normally likes to do this, he's sending his first force, and it's not a particularly big or powerful force. Zealots, the melee guys down here, aren't powerful at all. Stalkers are powerful considering how relatively cheap they are, and so Protoss always builds a ton of them, and they can blink, which means they can teleport all over the place. But he doesn't have any heavy infantry or heavy armor to protect. His units are spread out. They're not grouped together. This seems like a desperate counterattack for hero, but let's see what happens.
So hero, well, I was gonna say
okay, so the bunch of queens are coming down here for the Zerg, which he runs away from smartly, because those are actually strong Zerg units. Here are more roaches. He can outclass all these units, but he can't outclass all these units and all of these queens on the creep, which is the purple goo. But he's hero, and so he's going to attack anyways, and so he's going to come back again, take... Those disruptors are not good against larger units like queens, but he doesn't care. He's going to use them anyways. Okay, really quickly, all these little gross tumors are actually called creep tumors, and these are the things that the swarm queens, this unit here, yes, they can attack and do lots of stuff, including heal, but what they ultimately do between battles is just spread these tumors, which spreads the purple creep. So you can see that almost half the map at this point is covered with the purple creep, which isn't a ton for 12 minutes, but this is one of the biggest maps that is out there, I believe. And so it's actually quite a lot of area. And he's not only doubling up, but he's tripling up on creep tumors in some area. You only need one of these to spread the creep about this much. But he's, had the time and luxury to put 2 or 3 where there only needs to be 1, which just makes it almost impossible for the opponent hero here to destroy them and push the creep back. It's just redundancy. It's redundancy for creep, just like having multiple power plants instead of just one in case one of the power plants goes back. So here comes his attack. He's got a couple disruptors, a bunch of stalkers, a few zealots, and one immortal. He just blinked in a couple more units. All right. And boom. All of a sudden, the tides have turned. Hero is now up to 65, and Elazer has dropped to 54. Elazer had 78 units to Hero 67 at 1142. At 11:55, Elazer's already down to 60. Those Novas are going off, killing units, and now Elazer's down to 54. So he just lost dozens of units, just like that, with what's a relatively small Protoss force. Now here comes a bunch of more infantry, zealots, upgraded from Hero. Now they're both scrapping. This battle could go either way. They're not large armies whatsoever. The Purification Nova doesn't get any of the small units, but it's still a constant threat for them. And now, and Hero wins again. And yet another game. Unbelievable. Let me just check the sound super fast.
GG, Hero finds himself on Matt.
So, GG. Okay, so at 12 minutes and 36 seconds, Elazer taps out of the game. Almost every game Hero wins is a surrender by the other side. It's not a total destruction because they can see which way the wind is blowing with Hero. And once Hero gets a certain amount of momentum, they know they're not going to come back. And so they might as well just stop because they're not going to win. But remember this final time code, 12 minutes, 36 seconds. All right? All right. So let's go back a full minute. At 11 minutes, 34 seconds. So a minute ago, Elazer had an army of 85, had way more. Hero had only 61, which is very small for him and any Protoss at this point in the game. And you can just see visually it's a small Protoss force. He just barely had survived that previous attack by Elazer on his 4th or 5th base over here. So this is a minute before the game ends. So I'm gonna resist the urge to pause, and we'll play the next minute and just watch what happens. And keep one eye though on these red numbers down here, which is it shows what their army supply is, or their overall army power.
Hero is able to warp in more and more zealots. Finally, that nexus is dealt with. Hero
so now it's 78 to 67. He comes into the base. Elazer sends everything. Now comes a couple disruptors with their Novas. Takes out a bunch of small units here. That was roaches. So Elazer immediately drops to 60 army supply or army power. So now we're at 12 minutes. So it still seems relatively even, but the game's going to end in less than 30 seconds.
Things are getting really scrappy here in the middle
because Elazer all of a sudden is down to only 40 army supply, and while it's 55 to 49, which you would think on paper would be even, you have to remember Protoss, pound for pound, Protoss forces are stronger than Zerg forces, plus having to do with just the momentum and gathering of resources and so forth. So now come even more disruptors. I mean, there's just a ton of disruptors, and all of Elazer's few units are small to medium-sized ground units, which are specifically what disruptors are meant to deal with. And even though Elazer has at least, including this one, Elazer has at least 5 active bases and controlling half the map, and just attacked himself. And Hero doesn't have a giant Hero army, just a medium-sized army. He's going to tap out in about 3 seconds because he can see how it's trending. Look at the economy. All of a sudden, Hero's the rich one. All of a sudden, Elazer as a Zerg should be up to almost 100 drones getting minerals whereas hero at 67 probes for Protoss player is a lot of production. So he doesn't even wait for hero to blow up the first of 5 bases, but gives up because Elazer, as I mentioned earlier, I'm sure has watched a lot of tape on hero, knows which way the wind is blowing, and takes a look at the numbers and the positioning. And even though on paper Elazer is only behind a small amount on the surface, in terms of the flow of the game at 12.5 minutes, and he knows what I know, or I should say what I have been talking about, which is that after hero's first attack, he's able to continue mounting Protoss attacks every 2 or 3 minutes for the rest of the game. And so the fact that this is a late first attack for hero and a small one, and he still wins it, Elazer's going, I'm screwed, because hero has so many units that he potentially could beam in all at once. So that 51 can turn into 100 very quickly. In a best of 5, he gives up, but now he's down 2 games to 0. So 2 straight games where both myself, who's seen these before, has said, oh, hero's screwed, and he ends up winning. The announcers, who obviously are watching for the first time, in both games said, oh, hero's screwed, and then he shortly thereafter ends up winning. That's just hero. That's him. So you have to look at, even though hero is, for all of his skills, his micro control of units, and his tactics in actual battle are so superior, but also his macro economic building is superior in the background, so that he's always replenishing units. It's tough with hero because you want to watch him do fancy stuff with his units on the middle of the screen, but you're also keeping one eye on the production in the upper left and all the stats on the bottom bar in terms of money and units and structures and supply and upgrades and so forth, because that's how he turns games which look like they're even and still have a long way to go, like this one, but the other side surrenders anyways long before it's officially over, because they are also looking at some variation of these numbers or an estimate of them in their brain, and just know that they can't survive.
Those purification overs are the final nail.
So there goes hero.
GG. Hero finds himself on match point just
Right.
like
So as the announcers mentioned, the purification nova was those disruptors with their novas were the final nail in the coffin or whatever, just their existence and getting so close to the Zerg base, because Elazer knows that no one controls disruptors better than hero, and if he had already killed a bunch of his roaches and zerglings with disruptors, and if he had another major 1 or 2 explosions on those small Zerg units, it would definitively be over. Elazer doesn't let it get to that point, but he knows that from not a number of units standpoint, but from a power of units standpoint, he's far outmatched and outnumbered.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's pretty insane that even though the disruptor count was
These guys are good. They're broadcasting from home, and these aren't the final round. In the round of 16, the players are still playing from home, but we'll see starting in the next one, the quarterfinals, where it's I always forget who he's playing next. Estrella, excuse me, who's a Zerg, who's a Protoss player, so Protoss versus Protoss, who he really decimates. That we'll see them in person playing in Atlanta for the quarterfinals, the semifinals versus Maru, and then the finals against Bunny.
All the way in the top right-hand corner on match point. We have the red Protoss.
So do they go to one more round after this is the question, or does he win? I believe it goes. Yeah, I think this is a sweep. It's just, I believe this game just goes long for a hero game. Not even, maybe 10-15 minutes. But this does turn into a sweep.
Zerg player himself representing Team Liquid. Down 0-2, up against the wall. He needs to come back here.
All right, so again, I always mix up colors. I get these ones right. So Elazer is blue again, and hero is red again. I should mention that most maps are bigger than they used to be, and they almost always spawn the 2 sides on diagonally complete opposite sides of the map. In the old days, there was a lot of smaller maps, and they would often spawn both in the north or both in the south. They will still occasionally use older, smaller maps and do that just to throw curveballs, which is very fun. But for the most part, maps are bigger, encourage building more bases, having more expansion, but also have a more wide open playing field. So you think the fact that you have bigger maps that end up with more bases would go longer, but actually they're on average going much shorter than they used to and are more exciting than they used to be, because all of this middle ground doesn't have any minerals or base potential, and so is just, you know, no man's land where the fighting happens before one or the other or both bases are attacked.
Doing what I'm doing is, you know, just working out in PvZ.
So again, I want to stress that as great as hero is as a player, and specifically a Protoss player, and has been for many years, including in StarCraft 1 days, I believe, as a 30-year-old now, whose career was divided in half because of army service in Korea, but now he's back and great again. He's specifically known to not only dominate against Zerg in matches, both casual online matches and tournament matches, as we see here, but he's numerous times in his career has and continued to be innovating how you play against the Zerg with the Protoss, because it used to be, before they balanced it more with Legacy of the Void, final major multiplayer tweak in 2015 for StarCraft 2, Protoss had almost no chance against Zerg at the higher levels, but by adding a couple of really key units, like the Adept and the Disruptor, in 2015, but more so the fact that Hero came back from his army service and immediately was good and innovating in StarCraft again. He was one who started innovating with all those new units and helped show everybody else who are Protoss players how to use them, and also show people who are not Protoss players be more scared of the Protoss than they were. I mean, they're always going to be scared of Hero, but now they're a little bit more scared of other good Protoss players than they used to be, because of Hero's innovating, which obviously, yeah, I don't have footage of him innovating. You just have to read up on it. But if you listen to the announcers enough, they talk about how, you know, his unevenness of play and unpredictability of play does come from conscious aggression on Hero's end, but it also comes from experimenting with new things, because you can play 1,000 matches online, but most of those matches are going to be against players, if you're Hero, who are so inferior to you. Even the very good players are far inferior to you. You only get a chance to play extended series of 3, 5, or 7 games against the best player of the world during tournaments. And so while he wants to win these tournament games and these tournament series, he also needs to use the time to innovate his Protoss game and try out new things, even if it leads to some losses. I'm wondering if that's what happened during the qualifiers for the current ongoing ESL 2023 Masters, where the finals are in Sweden in a few weeks, and while Europe, non-Korea, Asia, and the Americas are still competing for spots, the Korean League has already had their 6, and, you know, perennially good or amazing players from Korea like Dark and Maru are in. Hero didn't even make it out of the group stage in his own country's league, in the GSL or whatever it's called, in the Korean StarCraft League. He lost 4 out of his 6 games and 2 out of his 3 series, and so is not going to be able to play in the finals, at least in June. Maybe Atlanta, like here, maybe Atlanta again this year, he'll have a chance, but he won't be in Sweden in a few weeks. But I'm wondering if, after winning, here it goes.
And there's charge, just to support whatever he needs.
I missed what happened there.
3 more gateways are being thrown down for 4 in total.
Hold on, I just missed that. We're gonna go back a couple seconds here. And by the way, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, 5.5 minutes in, he's building 4 gateways at once. You really don't normally see him build that many major structures at once, because of both the money, the time, and their vulnerability while being built. You don't normally see it this early, so it means he's trying to make an early push. But that's also because if you look at the map down here, Elazer is making an early push, with having bases and units already moving towards the middle of the map. So Hero is being forced into a situation to build the potential to then have a lot of units by building the buildings that those units come out from. But anyways, before we jump into this final game here and try and figure out what just happened that the announcers were screaming about, hero again sometimes is more motivated than others, and part of the reason I like watching these Atlanta games from last year, because I love hero and love watching hero, but he was at the top of his game and clearly very focused and on point at almost all times, which is not always the case. So he might have lost in the early rounds in Korea these past few weeks, or whenever that happened. It might have been complacency because he just won a major tournament a few months ago, back in November. But it's also because he's always trying out new things. He's never going to be totally complacent because the Koreans are the best overall, and the best players are mostly Korean with a handful of Europeans. And so, he's not going to sit out a group stage match against someone like Dark or Mario or other rivals of his from Korea. And so some combination of complacency and experimentation had him lose. But again, Korea is just and has always been the best at StarCraft and StarCraft 2, and so it's you never should feel shamed as a Korean. I mean, just getting into those group stage matches is a huge accomplishment, and not getting out of them, it's really like playing in the majors versus double or triple A baseball, with Korea being the major leagues and everywhere else in the world being double or triple A, the higher version of the minor leagues, but still the minor leagues. So he's always experimenting. So okay, so what just happened that they were? So what just happened that they were going on about?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the
Okay, so far, this shows the number and types of units lost by both sides, but just as, or more importantly, what that equals. So 3 adepts at 100 each plus 25 gas each. So he's lost 300 gas, 300 minutes, 75 gas. And you see what Elazer has lost, again, 5 minutes, usually pretty early into the game.
The units lost here,
Let's see what they were screaming about.
Down in total for basically 2 adepts, and now here is moving. Oh, he's not stopping.
Okay, so
He's making a 4th oracle.
oh, he's making a 4th oracle, right? So as I was saying, now it's only a slight eyebrow raiser when you see 4+ oracles in a game. But even though this was less than a year ago, and it's hero who's crazy and will do anything, the fact that he's putting 4 oracles on the board, like no one's ever done in a situation like this before. So here we see hero innovating right in front of our eyes. A mere, 7-8 months ago or whatever it was, in November of 2022 in Atlanta with a 4th oracle. So that's what they were getting excited about.
And there's charge just to support whatever
And he gets the charge, which is the upgrade for your basic infantry units. The zealots.
One of the absolute deadliest.
Sorry, I gotta turn them down in my ears and in your ears.
Jesus, you can really throw out in a PvZ. Very,
So you can see he's still working. You can see he's still working on 4 gateways up here. And at 5 minutes, I'm guessing he probably has 4 or 5. So this will take him somewhere between 8 and 10. And again, the number of units you can beam me up, Scotty. The number of units you can teleport down at a single time simultaneously in a pylon field as a Protoss player is exactly equal to the number of active gateways that you have. So as a Protoss player, the only way to build a huge army quickly is by having a ton of buildings to make sure that when you get the money to do so, you can spend all that money at once and beam all those units down. Because if you only have 3 or 4 gateways, well, you're limiting yourself to 3 or 4 units at once, and then you have to wait for it to cool down, which takes 20-30 seconds. All right.
Elazer scouts this time.
Yeah, Elazer, he needs to get eyes on this immediately. We do see one link trying to get on in, but the link does get denied. The oracles are joining.
So they're saying Elazer needs to get eyes on immediately. And there's all these oracles, and heroes doing all sorts of crazy stuff.
The last thing Elazer wants to do right now is to just fully commit to
Again, I want to point out how quickly the expansion is on Data C, which is a very common map. The expansion of, I don't know if these are bases or just small groups of units, but Elazer is definitely trying to play the territory control game by controlling territory in the middle of the map, even before he's got a base that's next to it. I mean, his bases are still on the edges. He's already trying to control the middle. Usually not a great strategy for the Zerg. You want to spread their purple, gooey creep along with base structures and defenses as well as units before doing this. I think hero is recognizing that that's happening, and so he's going to start attacking maybe even earlier than that 9.5, 10-minute mark, and he's getting more units that have high damage potential in small numbers, like these beautiful oracles right here.
Reason to suspect that charges coming his way. He has no reason to suspect that there are even more oracles coming his way.
Oh my god, mate, not like this, puppy, not like
So here comes 3 oracles. He just popped off. Okay, so his 4th, this is the perfect place for your 4th base because it's equidistant between the 3 existing Zerg bases from Elazer, and it's moving you towards the middle of the map. It immediately creates creep. The creep will start spreading, and then he sends in your swarm queens with those gross tumors, drop some tumors, and all of a sudden this will all be covered in purple. And so hero's calculating right now. He missed a chance to destroy the lair or the hive or whatever it is from the Zerg, their command center. He missed a chance to destroy it while it was still being built or force it to be canceled by Elazer. So we'll see how he deals with it now, if he even cares.
He does this as well. Like every now and then, he just knows that if he really wanted to as Protoss, just keep making oracles.
Yeah.
Right. The announcers are hypothesizing, okay, now he's got 6 oracles on the board. You never see this. And part of it is just because while they do lots of awesome stuff and can be super powerful, even a single one of them, they require tons of micromanagement, as both individually and in small groups. So to have 6 oracles in 2 groups of 3 that need to be manually managed themselves while he's building other units and building his base with at least 6 oracles is total insanity. And you can see he's building at least one more up top here in the production queue. And so the announcers are hypothesizing that up to 2-0 in a best of 5, where he's already has an insane number of oracles, that someone as crazy and as experimental as hero with his creativity might say, you know what, let's try and do an all oracle build and see if we can just win the series straight out with oracles, which no one has ever done as far as I know.
Nothing stopping you legally.
There's nothing stopping
Right, and it's not illegal, obviously,
We're going for a mass
as they point out.
What do we have to defend? Looking at the unit
Their supplies are and minerals and gas and everything are almost completely even on paper. Here come 6 oracles going straight to the main base. Now these are queens who have strong anti-air for what they are. I mean, because they can attack ground and heal units and spread the creep tumors, swarm queens just do everything for Zerg players, and you can get them early, and they're not that expensive. They're a somewhat OP Zerg unit. And so I don't know if hero was meaning to take his oracles, which some of them are already, by the way, only 2 of them have full health and shields. The other 4, now 3, have maybe shields but low health or not much of anything. I don't know if he was expecting all those queens. And now he's going after that brand new base that he just seconds ago moved away from. Now he's going off the base.
But it's not the biggest of deals.
All right, so now he's keeping his 5 oracles here. Normally a normal-brained Protoss player, which means they're not as good as hero, but your usual very good Protoss player would move at least 1 or 2 of these oracles away to recharge shields. There's one here that has almost no shields or health. And they also need energy to do all their special things, which is the purple bar, and they're all low. So any normal Protoss player would move these units away for a bit of time for them to heal and to get their energy back. But he's already moving up a bunch of infantry units with the zealots and anything else.
Is getting
Oh, and here's his new Oracle, which has full energy, which just came out. So what he's going to do is use the charge ability with his infantry units, and the Swarm Queens are going to be forced to deal with the ground attack, because no matter how good you are at controlling individual units, ground units are going to default to defend against ground attacks before they go after air units. So this is herO's expecting all of these Protoss infantry units to die, but hopefully distract them long enough for the Oracles to do damage. Let's see what happens. And they're just dishing out power. Killed 3 queens, I think, and about to kill a 4th. He's now down to 4 Oracles. Okay, so it was basically 6 Oracles versus 6 queens, and now it's 3 Oracles. Now it's 3 or 4 Oracles versus 1 queen. It's running, and it's going to destroy it, and he just wiped out all of them. So when he tried to attack the 6 queens with the Oracles straight up, he was going to get wrecked by them because they weren't being distracted. So he retreats the Oracles a little bit, brings in those ground units, distracts the queens, brings the Oracles immediately back, their energies recharge, and now he just took out 6 Swarm Queens, which is worth over 1,000 minerals, hundreds of gas, but more so, just lots of build time and overall halting of production.
It could ever be here for Protoss, as every single queen has fallen. The 4th base has been broken as well. Charge is going to be able to clean this up.
All right. Yeah, every single queen. That was all of their queens. That was literally all of them.
Be able to force hero back, though. The Oracles, they do turn around to make sure that his 4th doesn't get denied.
Why is he killing his own pylon there? I don't know. For some reason. Okay, so we just saw. So for economic reasons and because he just lost all of his heavy units, Elazer is going to do the one thing that Zerg can always do, which is produce a ton of weak, small, but a ton of them units, mostly Zerglings here, these little guys. And he's splitting them in 2 directions to try and do a 2-pronged attack, I'm assuming, on herO. And while even if he put all of these Zergs in the same place, it would still be a pretty weak force. I think he's trying to create the illusion of having a larger force than he has, Elazer that is, by splitting the Zergs and the rest of the units into at least 2 forces. Let's see what happens.
This recall is force, so Elazer able to turn this around. And
right, they say Elazer able to turn this around. This is the 3rd straight game where they're saying everything is going in Elazer's favor. And watch what happens 5 minutes from now.
He knows exactly what hero is going
so he's going after. So herO was trying to get greedy with a base he didn't really need in the upper corner here. I guess he's not trying to be greedy, and I must have missed it. His main base, where are we? We're at 35 minutes and 35 seconds. Where did he lose his main base? Oh no, he spawned in the upper right. I'm sorry. I just need a break. Right, okay, so he's not being greedy. So right, so he has, so this is his main original base here. And then down here is what's his 2nd base, 3rd base, 4th base. And this is what he was hoping to be his 5th base by putting a pylon down and barely getting through any of his nexus before it was destroyed. But he doesn't care because he still has 66 drones, or probes, I should say, which is a lot for Protoss to mine minerals and gas at his other bases. And he's focusing on already getting that first big army I'm always talking about at 9 minutes or 9 minutes 30 seconds. And he already had a major victory with those Oracles before he did that first major 9-minute rush. So I think this, as usual, this match goes on a little bit longer than it should, and herO makes it harder on himself than he should, because he should play a little bit more straight ahead after that success with the Oracles, but he's still ignoring defenses and just going for his big giant 9 or 10 minute army. There's some force of blue units up in the north here, where the base was just canceled. Let's see if they're doing anything. Yep, they're just little Zerglings. Chases them away with basic units. You can see one of the cool things just graphically in the game, but also in terms of spying, is all the buildings that either produce units or produce research So like this is a forge that produces research. This is a Templar archive, which also produces research. This produces drones and takes the minerals and gas from those drones or probes. And the Nexus is your central command center. You can see when it's active doing stuff. It's spinning or it's lit up. So you may not know what exact upgrade they're doing or what unit they're building, but you know that something is being built or researched there. So constant scouting is a necessity.
Yeah, we'll see if Elazer's going to be able to buy himself enough time here. Because the +2 banelings can absolutely pay off for him. You know,
so they're talking about how Elazer is ahead in the upgrade battle in terms of attack power of basic ground units. And if it's going to... They're trying to figure out if he's going to send a big force of those suicide bombers, the banelings, those spinning balls of goo that explode, which are extra powerful with upgrades.
The Zealots that are...
So here are these are the basic units of both sides. The Zealots are the most basic and cheapest and the weakest unit for the Protoss. Zerglings are way cheaper but also way less powerful and the weakest unit, but so fast to produce for the Zerg. And they're just kind of harassing each other over this area. But this is, if you look at the mini-map, this was the area where the base was canceled, not where we currently are. So by doing some area control with just units and pushing Elazer's units back, herO's giving himself another chance to get a base going where it was just spoiled. Now he's already going to try and do it again, I'm assuming. Plus, he brings in these oracles to just hover over potential base sites. All right, here's the giant glowing genie is Archon. It's amazing. You have to actually combine two powerful, expensive units to create this unit at all. And in versus play, it doesn't even have any special powers. In single player, in like co-op, you can use them to do mind control or, ruin the shields and energy reserves of other units. Here, it's just a unit with a ton of shields that can attack ground and air units that you put in the middle of your army to soak up damage and be prepared to defend and or attack ground and or air. It just gives you a lot of flexibility, even though it's just a basic ground attack and a basic air attack.
Giving him any time. He's already got his first wave of Archons.
So in terms of, I'm not sure about game time. In terms of actual time, there's about still 4 or 5 minutes left. All right, so now both herO and Elazer are at almost the exact same number of workers in the army. The fact that they both have around 75 worker units heavily favors herO because, again, Protoss stuff is so expensive. You need to be constantly getting minerals and gas to be able to replenish forces, whereas there's tons of cheap unit possibilities for Zerg. And they're both at around 80 power of armies, but just looking at these two forces, I mean, I don't know where the other offensive forces are among that 80 for Elazer, but this little Zerg thing and this pretty sizable Protoss thing, if these two go head-to-head, and Elazer can't get away, herO should decimate them. Let's see what happens. Yeah, they're running. They're running smartly, and he doesn't even pursue because herO's not. Oh, nope. He doesn't retreat. He goes into his base, southern base, with all the oracles. You never see this. Not only do you almost never see 7 oracles period on the board, you never see them all together, almost 10 minutes of the game, acting as a spear point, a spear tip, excuse me, as the spear tip of the attack from the oracles, which do have this powerful pulsar beam, but you just don't see it with this many oracles this late in the game in a giant base that's heavily defended with your more traditional units back here. Let's see if they get wrecked. Now he's going to charge in with his zealots, and the banelings do go off and do get rid of some of the units, but they don't get the oracles and they don't get the Archon. He still has 3 or 4 oracles.
Archon is exposed. It looks like the Archon is going to be going down.
Right, the Archon's exposed. The mutated Banelings can take. I'm sorry, God, there's so many units to keep track of. These are roaches, and then the bigger, glowier version of the roach, the mutated roaches. Went off there for a sec. Which are the ones that shoot that thing into the sky that then lands and damages or whatever. Counter Archons pretty nicely when there aren't a lot of units that do so.
Elazer, and Elazer, he holds.
Yeah, that's Elazer really using this map to his advantage, taking advantage of.
So now, again, you see that Elazer has a little bit more offense, which is great. Their economies are still relatively even, and as are their probe count. So numerical-wise, if anything, hero is in command, because when the numbers are even, it benefits the one with the more powerful base army forces, which is the Protoss, therefore hero. But he lost a lot of units in that last battle, didn't really gain ground, and now Elazer has smartly expanded his base straight across the map and to start encroaching his creep, the purple ooze, into the bases of hero, which makes Elazer's own units even more powerful than they already are when they're fighting on the creep or defending.
And whatnot. Hero, I think, has finally realized that the reason why he's not able to reinforce so quickly is...
But again, if you look at the production, this says everything you need to know about the two forces. They have about the same amount of money, but Elazer, in this production tab, is producing 40 plus units at once, while Hero's making another Oracle, 1 building, and 2 upgrades. But that's just because Zerg are so cheap but die so quickly. And units like Oracles are expensive and slow to build, but as we've seen over and over again in this particular game, incredibly powerful. He's got 5 here. They're low on energy, but by the time this Oracle builds, they'll have enough energy to do stuff. And they'll have his 6 or 7 Oracles again, which is just ridiculous.
Have that Warp isn't available for him just yet. Should be getting it soon, though, and we'll see if that's enough for him to really secure a victory here.
And I really worry as the space is quite exposed.
All right, this is what overexpansion does. It left. I was praising the construction of this base specifically about 4 or 5 minutes ago when it was built, because it sits between 3 already existing bases. I'm sorry about the hiccuping in the feed. I'm not sure what that's about. But because he doesn't build defenses here and decides to just keep expanding the Zerg along the south, it's completely undefended. And an undefended Zerg base is way worse than an undefended Protoss base, because Protoss base structures can take a lot more damage, but more so you can you can often just beam home your army to help defend your base with the Protoss, plus beam in new units to that base instantaneously if you have them queued up. Here, there is no way for him to get reinforcements, and so by taking this out, now the door is open in terms of lack of defensibility on the original 2 or 3 Elazer Zerg bases.
Not a great economic position to be in, both in terms of mining
Yep,
and in terms of production, but
here comes some Banelings into
the
the Protoss base, and they explode and do almost no damage. Total failure.
Enough to keep this push going.
Yeah, exactly.
Great work by Hero to control his workers and get him out of the way. He's 1 Archon he knows is going to die. He's using it as a distraction to create a couple seconds, I think, for this Immortal to pop out and now to beam down a bunch of other units.
Very much out of energy.
But he's still using these Oracles, and the Queens are much weaker when they're not on the creep. All the Zerg units are.
Roaches knocking down his door.
But Elazer is relying too much on roaches, which are only okay ground units, even when they're morphed into their bigger, glowier form. And so now, even though Elazer is theoretically or technically ahead 80 army power to 47 army power, the quality of the units is heavily in Hero's favor with all of these Oracles, which are super fancy, and he's got 1 million of them, and at least 1 Immortal, which is a very, very almost invincible ground attack Protoss ground unit.
Early on because they're basically touching here when it comes to their...
All right, so now he gives up on that attack after just not fully assaulting the base. There's a few reasons for it. One is, yes, that base was exposed. He did take care of the Zerg hatchery there, the command center, but there's also Zerg units spawning much closer to his base, almost on his base. And he needs, while that Oracle laser beam thing is super powerful, it does rely on a limited energy reserve. He needs that to repair, or to replenish, I should say. And in the meantime, he's not only adding another robotics bay, which build the bigger, beefier units like Immortals, but the robotics facility or whatever it's called, or maybe I got that backwards, the robotics upgrade structure, so that he can build Colossi, which are these super tall Protoss unit that shoot huge beams and just wreck large groups of small Zerg units. Or maybe he's just going to build more Immortals. So there's a couple minutes left only. Now we're in the southeast base, which is the newest base, but he's only got a handful of Zerglings to dedicate to it, because the Elazer is trying to defend a lot of different fronts. Here comes hero. So he's trying to rebuild the base that hero just killed, and hero goes back as the Elazer tries to rebuild it and kills it. Now, normally a good player like Elazer would cancel the building of that base before it gets destroyed, because, well, you lose the base, you get your money back. If you don't cancel it and it just gets destroyed, which is what just happened, you lose the money too, as well as losing the base and the time and so forth. So very sloppy play by Elazer there. And that might be the turning of the tides. And while he's got 1,000,000 roaches right here, which is technically stronger than 1,000,000 Zerglings, the little tiny guys, they're not ultimately nearly as strong as they look on the board. And he's still only at a couple queens because of the massacre of all the queens by Hero's Oracle just a few minutes ago. So this is, again, another untraditional game, and I give Elazer credit as the Zerg player, excuse me. I give him credit, even though he's going to end up losing this series 3-0. In all three games, he was able to take hero out of his normal routine of having a major Protoss attack of that's an army composed of a variety of units, and then do so over and over again every 3 or 4 minutes throughout the game. After that point, I keep calling it the 9-minute or the 10-minute army. I guess I'll refer to it. The 9-minute army for hero, 9.5-minute army at 9.5 minutes on the game time. So by now, hero would be sending out his second big force, but there's been a lot of play in neutral ground. There's been a lot of hit and runs on both sides. Hero's had to defend his base, and so he's only at 63 power, but again, he's got 2 disruptors coming out of those robotics bays that I was just talking about, but he also can beam in a bunch of smaller ground units instantaneously from all the gateways that he's built.
The last thing you want to happen to you right now, when you're struggling to get a 5th base, every time
so that was quote unquote only the 5th base for the Zerg. So now hero is up 5 bases to 4, which as a Protoss player usually means game over for a player like hero at this point. Let's see how they actually end it. It's not going much longer this game. The numbers are still relatively even, but the destroying that 5th Elazer base multiple times and the money and time loss is, I don't think he's going to be able to recover from. The Banelings do almost nothing. The Banelings do almost nothing, and this is the brilliant micromanagement play by hero, because you're going to see a bunch of his stalkers right in the middle of where the suicide bombers are, the Banelings, the Zerg suicide bombers are. It looks like they're all going to blow up, but he blinks them using their teleport ability, which is called Blink, away before they can, I believe. Let's see what happens. Right, so here's again him taking down the queens. Okay, so right here, this is the game. Hero's now starting to push out forces. They're both pushing towards 100 in terms of army strength. Hero has an insane economy, even though you can't see it here. It's just because he's spending the money as fast as he can get it. He has 1 heavy unit here with the Immortal, but these stalkers, these 4-legged robotic guys and these basic Protoss units, the Zealots, are all very, very, just like the Disruptors, Nova is great against small to medium-sized Zerg units. The Banelings, especially when you have 5, 6, 7 or more, as is the case here with the Elazer, the small to medium-sized Protoss units are very vulnerable to them. And if a Elazer is able to destroy most or all of these 5 Stalkers and 4 or 5 Zealots, and maybe even the Disruptor here, even if the Immortal survives because it's got tons of health and shields and even has a secondary barrier shield that kicks in before it dies, if he can land some of this, that would really help turn the tides, at least buy a Elazer some time. But I think we're going to see that they do very little damage. Okay, now they're starting to go off. Now he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Stalkers at least. Okay, and now the Banelings are going off, but watch what happens. They're starting to go off, starting to go off, starting to go off. You're thinking, oh my god, they're getting everything? Nope. He used Blink on every single one of his Stalkers, and he doesn't even blink them that far, but he blinks them just far forward, behind where the Banelings were rolling, and misses all of them. And so, while the army countdown here still looks, let's put it this way, if those Banelings had connected, herO's army count would be more like 30 or 40 rather than 63. And the Elazer would still be at 89. And herO's going to do what he always does, which is a counterattack. No matter what, he's going to counterattack, whether it's advisable or not. Yeah, they were really going after the Disruptors, which were in back of the Stalkers. But herO, just so good at controlling individual units and small groups of units. And now he's got a bunch of Disruptors and Oracles. Now another base goes down. Now the Zerg are down to 3 bases, to 5 bases. Okay, there's that recall I was talking about. So Elazer is able to extend this game a tiny bit by attacking one of herO's resource mining bases, and so he uses the recall function to beam back all of his offensive units, which immediately halts his attack. But we're far enough in the game, and the Stalkers, and this is why everyone uses tons of this unit called Stalker, they are so fast just in general, moving or running, and then you can blink them as well. They're one of the fastest units in all of StarCraft, in terms of pure speed, but also acceleration and just quickness of lateral movement and so forth, that he can afford to come back, nip that last-ditch effort by Elazer to attack a Protoss base, nip it in the bud, and then immediately send his units back, I guess, to defend this base, which Elazer can't even get, and Elazer's down to 54. I didn't even see where that happened. That's the thing. Zerg can lose units so fast. Right, so it's 82 versus 79, but Elazer committed almost half of his army to taking out this Nexus, which is the newest of the bases for herO, and isn't even doing anything in terms of mining. It's just sitting there, and Elazer decides that's where he wants to attack, but maybe he doesn't think herO, being such an offensively, aggressively minded player, would do this, where he recalls literally his entire army, but he does do it, and by herO recalling his entire army, this force of 79 Zerg, army strength, is going to drop precipitously in the next couple seconds, because their attack of so-so units just literally got dropped on top of by the entire Protoss army. There it is, 72, 66, 46, boom. So he gets off a giant, I mean, so even though, sorry, dude, I have to watch this again. So here's all the roaches, right? So the roaches come back here to kill these probes. There aren't even that many probes working to kill. As I said, this is an undeveloped base. It's not even powered, a bunch of its structures, and the no gas. So he jumps in as if to, damage herO's economy this late in the game with a bunch of roaches. Now they're stuck back there, okay, at 12 minutes, 36 seconds. There's a recall at 12 minutes 39 seconds. So so I think you can recall one big clumped group. It's not every unit on the board, but like wherever your biggest army is, you select the base you want to go to, and then you click on that group, and they just beam back immediately. And they beam in almost immediately down here. So within 5 seconds of the Zergs, the roaches coming in to kill a supply line that doesn't even exist, now hero has warped back a very large stalker army. But more importantly, he's got his oracles, and here comes the disruptor about to launch one of its giant novas, and it's already in the middle of the Zerg. And by going into the supply line area of the Protoss base, even though it's not really doing or producing anything, it's a choke point where these roach units are stuck both ways, and they're not going to be able to move. He's bottled... by defending quickly, he's on the offense, even though it's his own base. And I believe this purification nova from this disruptor, or I should say a nova from this disruptor, is about to go off in the middle of these roaches and essentially end the game. There it goes. Yep, they drop by 20, so that's like 10 roaches dead like immediately. So now hero is up in economy, way up in army relatively, and at this far in the game, up at least 1 or 2 bases as a Protoss, and up on army. It seems almost impossible for someone like Elazer with Zerg to come back. He just doesn't have enough supplies and enough bases against someone who can produce units and get them out as fast as hero. Yeah, I mean, Hero's teasing him at this point. He could have killed all of those drones. Now he's killing the drones. And this is the third... Yeah, now he's only going to have 3 bases left after this, is Elazer. Elazer sending whatever he has to distract to the southeast base of Hero, but this isn't even one of Hero's most important bases. He's got plenty of money, and he's just got too many stalkers and other units. He lost a bunch of probes, but he still has 70 probes and tons of money in the bank. Here come the oracles. And Elazer should have 5 or 6 bases, but only has about 2.5. And is only going to have 2, I think, in a second. So here comes finally, it's normally at 9 minutes, but finally after a bunch of hit and runs and a bunch of repels from his own base and from neutral territory, 5 minutes later than he wanted, Hero finally has his big, giant, sexy, diverse Protoss force headed in the right direction towards the Zerg, and this should be good game GG almost immediately. And those oracles have stayed alive the whole game. Unbelievable control, just physical control of those oracles by Hero. And there's just way too many stalkers with those disruptors there. And he's now, Elazer's just too much pride, and there's GG, and boom, and there it is. A 3-0 win. It's really interesting. It's really interesting, guys. And next up after a break is going to be the quarterfinals, which is Hero versus Estrella, who is a Protoss player, I believe, from Europe. Estrella is an American Protoss player. Excuse me, he's American. I should know him then. Estrella, a Protoss player who's very good. Do not get me wrong. He's very, very, very good. But Hero is going to beat him also, I think, 3-0, or at least it takes less than an hour, including breaks, to do it. This took 42 minutes, which I'm sorry, less than a half hour. In the next series against Estrella, who's another Protoss player, it's going to take about a half hour to win that, which for quarterfinals is way too short if you're on the losing end. Even here in the round of 16, it did take 42 minutes because some of these games went longer than they should have. But Hero gets a 3-0 sweep, and in all 3 games, the announcers at one point were like, oh, Elazer's too far ahead here. Hero's never going to be able to catch up. And in all cases, Hero caught up almost immediately, and he does it faster and with more power, and then counterattacks faster and with more power than you expect. And so we're going to jump into... with some zombie grub on the commentary, who I absolutely love and adore, but I'm going to turn her down because she is very, very loud. Not everyone loves her because she's a little loud. And on the Inside Out map, we have Estrella versus Hero, so it's a medium-sized map, a nice-looking map between 2 Protoss players. And this is live, I believe, because this is the quarterfinal in Atlanta from last November 2022. DreamHack Masters. And let's see. This was 5 months ago, November 20th, 2022. So it's Protoss versus Protoss. So now I'm going to show you why, even though hero is known specifically for having pioneered the best way to play against the Zerg as a Protoss and even dominate them, as we just saw happen in that previous matchup against Elazer, here we're going to see him dominate even more so another Protoss player. And I'm actually going to do some other hero versus Protoss versus Protoss games with hero later that are from championships, but not like from like final rounds of championships, but specifically ones where he plays other great Protoss players in a tournament setting and just dominates them, because he can do it by mirroring them but doing it better, or by doing something completely different and totally countering Protoss players who tend to be conservative and all use mostly the same strategy. But we're going to take a break. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, as I said, next up here is Hero versus Estrella, the ESL DreamHack StarCraft 2 Masters, Atlanta 2022. Hero's run to the finals where he wins it all, but we got to go through the quarterfinals first, and then the semis versus Maru, who's widely considered the best, if not one of the best of all time, and then Bunny in the finals, who's very cute and sad when he loses to Hero, but it's Hero, man, and he wasn't even supposed to be there in the first place, although now Bunny's the major force, qualifying for now numerous major tournaments over the last year or two. But at this one, this is how fast things change in esports. Just last November, Bunny, who he's going to play in the finals, two series from this one, it was not even supposed to get out of the first round, basically. But this guy, Estrella, is well established. I assume is the best American Protoss player, because I keep seeing his name everywhere, and there aren't that many great American players, let alone great American Protoss players. And then he's going to play Maru, who is the best Terran player from Korea, and maybe the best Terran player overall, even though he doesn't always win the big games. And then it's him versus Bunny, who I believe is a Zerg player in the finals. Let me double check on that real quick. Is Bunny a Zerg player? No, Bunny's also Terran. So this is a mirror match of Protoss v Protoss, and then we get two longer and much more epic and closer matches between a hero and Terran player with Maru and then Bunny. But first I want to show you how he dismantles a fellow excellent Protoss player here with Estrella. Thank you for joining. We'll be back in a little bit. This has been eSports for Noobs, presented by the Bizzle, and we'll see you soon.